All right, let's go over this warm up. I'm going to do this in two parts because this year we had kind of not done this particular page. So I'm going to do this page and then I'm going to start on the next page in a separate video. All right, so on this page, we revisited an older topic of when we were transforming data. So over here to the right, you can see that we have this table of information. And X bar is the mean. So this was the average, and these were hours. So these were credit hours that students are taking per semester for a full-time student, okay? And so they would take on average 16.65 class hours with a standard deviation of 2.96. And then if you were doing a box plot, then here's your 5-number summary. Your min, Q1, median, Q3, and max. Okay, so the key here is that we were transforming from credit hours, the number of credit hours, into cost. And so that meant that we needed to pay attention to the transformation rules. And so let's remember those. So those transformation rules were such that the measures of center or even location, Q1, Q3, min, and max. So measures of center or measure of location, the mean and median, are affected by all components, add, subtract, multiply, divide. But, okay, so we had done this with that ball. Remember, the measure of center is affected by add, subtract, and multiplication, stretching it and dividing it. But the standard deviation measures of spread, standard deviation or IQR, if you remember that ball that I had, we would stretch it or compress it. That spread was only affected by multiplication or division. A measure of spread, how spread out the data was not affected by adding or subtracting it along the number line. Okay, so here's an example. At Weatherford College, and I did look up these numbers, so these were pretty straightforward. It has an expense of $900 for books and supplies and a cost of $85 per credit hour. So that made this formula. The cost is $900 plus $85 per hour. So then when we transform this, so what's the expected mean? So we're going to come over here and we're going to take our mean and we're going to plug it into the formula. And see, we can see that since mean is affected by the addition and the multiplication, then we did the 900 plus 85 per hour. All right. But look at this standard deviation. So here was this standard deviation of $2.96. It goes into this function, and it is not affected by the plus 900. Standard deviation is not affected. See, you added 900 and then multiplied. The multiplication affected it, but not the addition. So it was only $85 times 296. So that's the variability of the costs. All right, now median, that's a measure of center, a measure of center. Up here it says the median was 16 hours. So median is affected by add, subtract, multiply, and divide. So 900 plus $85 times this median value that we put in there. But IQR, which we actually had to come over here and figure out what that IQR is. Do you remember how IQR is Q3 minus Q1? So this is taking back things from last semester. So that was $4, 4 hours. 19 hours minus 15 hours because we have to pay attention to units. And so then 85 times 4. We only did the multiplication. All right, so that was the middle 50% of costs were within a span of $340. All right, so this one is now kind of asking us some additional questions, more along the lines of outliers. and the outlier fences. So let's take a look at that. At most universities, students are required to get prior approval from an academic advisor if they take more than 21 hours in any given semester. So, according to the statistics at Weatherford College, would you consider 21 credit hours a semester unusually high? So remember this idea of unusually high, we're trying to see, is that 21 credit hours an outlier? So we need to find the outlier fences. So we're going to have to think back to our outlier rules. Our standard deviation rule, there was two different ones. We did one if you used standard deviation. So that was mean plus 2 standard deviations. So 16.65 hours is the mean plus 2 times the standard deviations. So here's the fence on this. And we'll talk about that. So then once you have your fence, so you know once you have that fence, you want to see is the maximum above the upper fence. So let's take a look. 22.57. Oh, look, that max was 28. So we definitely had an upper outlier. Oh, but that's not what the question asked. The question asked, would 21 be considered an outlier? And so then that answer is no, because if the fence is at 22.57 and the question is about 21, 21 is inside the fence. So 21 hours would not be considered an upper outlier. Okay, now the IQR rule. It was a different rule, so we remember that is Q3 plus 1.5 times the IQR. So once we fill that in, that would put the fence at 25. So that means if we had, because we would usually do that if we were on a box plot. So if this fence is at 25, then anything past that's going to be an outlier. Well, I do know I'm going to have an outlier because I have 28, so it's out here somewhere. But the question is about 21. 21 is inside the fence. So 21 would, again, not be considered the outlier. So whether you used the standard deviation rule or the IQR rule, neither one of them was an outlier. All right. What amount of hours in a given semester would you consider unusually high or unusually low? So basically, identify those fences and then tell me the number of hours just on the outside of those fences. So we had done this right here in the previous problem. From part E, the standard deviation rule, remember the fence was at 22.57. So if 22.57 is the fence, then you can't take 22.57 hours. You would take 23 hours or more to be an outlier. And then for the IQR rule, it was right on 25, so 25 hours or more. Now, let's talk about the lower fences. For the standard deviation rule, we would do mean minus 2 standard deviations. And so that was a fence at 10.73. So 10 hours. Ooh, that's wrong there. So 11 hours isn't an outlier because if you have your fence at 10.73, 11 hours is just inside the fence. So actually 10 hours or less. So I need to fix that answer key. 10 hours or less is a lower outlier. And then for the IQR, Q1 minus 1.5 IQRs is 9. So on that one, it would have to be 9 hours or less. Okay, so that is that first page, which really was based on first semester concepts that we had done. So I think that this year I had asked my students to not do this particular problem or this particular page. I had left it off of their quiz. So, but it is a good thing to look back and review this if you had forgotten those items. Okay, so I'll go ahead and do another video for the next page.